Oh, good evening, and welcome back to the Poe Museum. I was just admiring one of my favorite Poe movie posters in the collection. I don't know what it is, but there's something about it that really speaks to me. So how about for tonight's installment of the Curator's Crypt, let's take a look at some of the Poe movie memorabilia in the collection. And if you stick around, I'll give you my top 13 favorite Poe pictures on tonight's installment of the Curator's Crypt. If you're one of the few unlucky souls to have watched previous episodes of the Curator's Crypt, you'll know that I usually showcase artifacts that are 180 or 200 years old, but those aren't the only kinds of pieces the Poe Museum collects. We also want to shed light on Poe's legacy and the ways he continues to influence artists of all genres: painters, writers, musicians, and filmmakers. So we have an extensive collection of artifacts related to Poe movies. And just look around. We've got movie posters, Vincent Price dolls. Who's Vincent Price? Well, this is a life mask of the legendary Vincent Price. Born in 1911, he went on to star in a series of Poe movies, so his name has become synonymous with Poe pictures. He starred in such films as 1960's The Fall of the House of Usher, or The Pendulum, The Masque of the Red Death, Tales of Terror, and The Tomb of Ligeia. In fact, back in 1975, Vincent Price gave a reading of The Raven while standing on this staircase in the Poe Museum for the guest down there. So if you're going to watch some Poe movies, some of Vincent Price's are the place to start. In fact, we even have books in our library like the Poe Cinema here about Poe in the movies. We even collect things like this bizarre artifact. This is what they call a VHS tape. And you put it into a VHS player. And back in the 1980s, this is what they used to watch movies on your television before they came up with a much more convenient DVD. Of course, now I guess we just stream everything. But if you're interested in starting to watch some Poe movies of your own, how about I give you a rundown of my 13 best Poe movies to watch. Let's start with number 13, a fairly recent one, 2012's The Raven, starring John Cusack. It's not actually an adaptation of Poe's poem, and it's not actually a very good movie, but Poe fans will like it just so they can pick apart some of the details, like it's not Roger Griswold, it's Rufus Griswold. He wasn't engaged to Emily, he was engaged to Elmira. Little things like that. And it's something of a mystery, but it's also kind of an adventure film. It has a good pace, so it keeps it moving throughout. But if you want to look at something a little bit more classic, let's go back to 1928 and Jean Epstein's fabulous The Fall of the House of Usher, a silent film full of bizarre surrealist images and montages. Definitely a feast for the eyes. But if you'd like to see something a little bit more trashy, stereotypically slashery, how about 1989's The Masque of the Red Death, starring Frank Stallone of the Stallone family? It's updated to the 1980s, where they're throwing a masquerade ball in a castle, and it features a rocking soundtrack by a stereotypical 1980s hair metal band. Good stuff. Another more recent film, 1964, The Castle of Blood, also known in Italian as Danza Macabra. In this, a reporter talks to Edgar Allan Poe and says, oh, well, Edgar Allan Poe's stories are a bunch of bunk. There's no way you could believe them. Nobody could ever expect them to be real. And Poe challenges him to spend the night in a haunted castle to find out if Poe's stories are real or not. Beautiful, stark, black and white film. Great visuals, but something a little bit more classy. 2014 Stonehearst Asylum, which you can find streaming now. Got an all-star cast with Kate Beckinsale, Ben Kingsley, Michael Caine, great set design, and it's one of the few adaptations of Poe's story, The System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather, that you're going to find. But if blood and gore are more your taste, at number 8 we've got Two Evil Eyes. This is an anthology film with 2 separate stories being adapted by 2 different directors, and they are both horror aficionados. We've got Dario Argento, who does the operatic gore, and of course George Romero, best known for his zombie films. But something a little bit more classic, how about at number 7, Murders in the Rue Morgue from 1932, starring the inimitable Bela Lugosi, who's just come off of his starring role in 1931's Dracula. Yeah, this is the guy who pretty much invented the suave Dracula and the cape. And the Poe Museum here was instrumental in helping promote it. These are some film stills from the movie and a letter that Universal Pictures Director of Exploitation wrote to the museum back in 1932, hoping it helped promote the movie by giving out these film stills to our guests. But if you want something a little bit more recent, check out 1991's The Pit and the Pendulum, directed by Stuart Gordon, the creator of Reanimator. Definitely not a movie for kids. It's got the blood, the gore, the darkness that you expect from Stuart Gordon himself, the one and the only. But at number 5, let's take you right back to the 1920s to another silent film adaptation of The Fall of the House of Usher, the same year as Epstein did his. Here in the United States, J.S. Watson directed an experimental film, and you definitely have to see it to understand it. But here's a letter that he wrote to the museum in 1929 asking if maybe the Joneses here at the Poe Museum could help him get his film shown at some of the theaters in Richmond. And there's another adaptation of The Fall of the House of Usher you should check out, 1960s version starring Vincent Price and directed by Roger Corman. This was the first in a series of Price, Corman, Poe collaborations. And for the most part, they try to stay fairly true to the story. Of course, they add a lot of subplots. You can't base your book report on this one, but it is a fun and sometimes unintentionally humorous movie. But if you want to see a classic Poe film that has absolutely nothing to do with Poe's story, look to Edgar Allan Poe's The Black Cat from 1934. This is the first teaming of Bela Lugosi with Frankenstein's monster himself, Boris Karloff. And as I mentioned, the story has nothing to do with Poe's original. They just put Poe's name on it. And I think one of the characters' name is Polzig. And there is a black cat somewhere in the movie you can see. But it creates the Poe atmosphere of darkness and sickness. And the man in the story does keep his wife's body preserved underneath his house. That's a kind of a Poe-esque element, even if it's not from one of Poe's stories. And there's another anthology film I recommend at number 2, Tales of Terror from 1962. And we've got a film still here from Tales of Terror. This has 3 different Poe stories adapted and stars Vincent Price, Peter Lorre, who was in M and Casablanca and Mad Love, and then Basil Rathbone. A great combination. And this adapts Poe's stories Morella and The Facts of the Case of M. Valdemar and The Black Cat. And when you see The Black Cat one, they infuse the story with a lot of humor. They also find a way to combine and merge the stories, The Black Cat and The Cask of Amontillado, into one, and it just works perfectly. But my number 1 recommendation for a Poe movie to see is one that probably nobody else will agree with. but you ought to check out Extraordinary Tales, directed by Raul Garcia. It's an animated anthology film, so it had adaptations of several of Poe's stories, including The Telltale Heart, narrated by Bela Lugosi. Back from beyond the grave, they got a recording of Bela Lugosi reading The Telltale Heart. They also have Sir Christopher Lee narrating The Fall of the House of Usher. They also have The Pit and the Pendulum with Guillermo del Toro narrating. They have The Masque of the Red Death, which is almost completely silent, just music, but features voiceover work by Roger Corman. So one great Poe adaptation after another, each one in a very distinctively different style. So visually, it's a great feast for the eyes and the mind, and somehow he also manages to stay pretty true to the text, not adding a bunch of subplots that have nothing to do with the story. So definitely highly recommended. So what do you think of my list? Have I left out any important Poe pictures? If so, leave them down in the comments and let me know what are your favorite Poe movies made over the years, so I'll be sure to check them out. And until then, it might be too late to catch Vincent Price reciting The Raven on this staircase, but it's not too late to catch the next episode of the Curator's Crypt a week before anybody else gets to see it, just by supporting the Poe Museum at patreon.com/Poe Museum.